Ireland's joint bid to host the 2030 World Cup could be ruined by the behaviour of some of the football fans during Sunday's Euros final.
Yeah, thanks, guys. Some barged their way through gates into Wembley Stadium. They had no tickets. They just forced their way through. Others caused chaos in the city before the game. They were letting off flares. They were throwing missiles, bottles, you name it. And dozens of people were arrested after big fights broke out. So this is the question that everyone's asking this morning. Has it dashed our hopes of hosting a prestigious sporting event?
Well, let's ask Lord Seb Coe, who was chairman of the London 2012 organising committee for the Olympics, who says the behaviour on Sunday was unacceptable, and the former FA chief executive, Mark Palios, who was at Sunday's final and says the violence ruined the experience for fans. Well, very good morning to you both. Sebastian Coe, you know, you were in charge of an epic bid that brought an incredible event to London back in 2012, and the atmosphere around that was remarkable, inspiring, and brought the country together. On Sunday, we saw the flip side of that. We saw people trying to get into Wembley without tickets. They got into Wembley without tickets. We saw violence, people being injured, disgusting scenes. It was like football hooliganism had come back. Is there a problem around football in particular, and could it threaten our bid?
Yes, there is a problem around football generally. The vast majority of football fans, and one of them, would no more have jumped off Beachy Head than sent racist tweets or booed national anthems. But we have to accept that there are too many that don't see that sporting event in exactly the same way. You talked about London 2012. Well, you know, I think we made massive strides globally in terms of reputation. We had passionate fans and we certainly had passionate volunteers. And I think we left those games with a very enhanced reputation. The 2030 bid for the World Cup isn't terminal, but there are issues that need to be addressed. They need to be addressed publicly, and politicians need to choose their words very carefully at this moment. This is a very competitive landscape. The thought that a bid, however worthy and however deserving, is simply just going to fall into your lap is a rather old-fashioned view. The decision whether or not the World Cup comes to the UK, which I really hope it does in 2030, is now down to every football association in the world. And booing anthems beforehand, booing players during games, behaving in the way that many of the fans did on that occasion is not conducive to a successful bid, and these issues need to be addressed. And look, those fans have friends, they have family. People need to call them out on that. It was unacceptable, and it has put back the cause of British sport, I think, quite some way.
We were hoping to talk to the editor of Spite, someone called Brendan O'Neill. We can't seem to raise him at the moment. I hope we get him before this interview's over. He would have said that this kind of misbehaviour that we're all talking about is just part of football, and it's something that we have to accept. And he would also say, I think I'm quoting him accurately, that the booing of another country's national anthem is just a bit of fun. It's just meant to be a bit of banter.
That's the morality of the knackers yard. That is not acceptable. It is a depressing and it is a dismal prospectus. That is not how football fans uniquely behave. And just to say that the booing of national anthems, I sat watching that final, disappointed as I was, in an ostensibly Italian, with an Italian group of people. You know, they looked at us as Brits sitting there, embarrassed. We were embarrassed, and they just looked shocked at the booing of that anthem. And that should have been called out earlier. That wasn't something that sort of crept up on us. The first time we played, that took place. The authorities and politicians should have stood up and said, no, this is unacceptable. But it was sort of, you know, that sloppy thinking is what has actually done football no favours in the past.
Mark Palios, as Susanna said, you were at Sunday's final, and you say that in many ways the violence ruined the experience for you, but did it also frighten you?
Just let me say that the violence that I saw was really restricted to a gang of yobs, 50 or so, that actually rushed the barriers, which were not meant to be security barriers. They were barriers that were testing for COVID. and for tickets. So in that regard, you knew that something serious was going to happen. I didn't see the violence that apparently happened within the stadium when fans gained access to it. I think, as Sebco, it was the whole experience that sort of was ruined it for me. I mean, the booing of the national anthem is something that I just think it goes against the what sport is about, which is about accepting the opposition that you play and respecting the opposition that you play. And so things like that are not missed by UEFA. For me, just back to the question of how it impacts on the bid, as Seb rightly says, put some perspective on this. We do have the ability to, as we did in 2012, to put on some global events. And judging in hindsight is always very difficult. But the reality is that UEFA had 2 other strong bids that they could put their weight behind, and that would make a massive difference. I think for me, the key thing is the investigation into this by the FA. From what they've said, which is that the numbers of stewards and police and security was in excess of that which was required. It strikes me, and from my experience, that they probably underestimated the perfect storm that was brewing, which was you've got this lethal cocktail of people coming out from lockdown, which is massive to this country and to cultures around the world. You have the fact that we've reached the final for the first time in sort of 55 years. There's an 8 o'clock kickoff, and so you would expect people to have been drinking all day and afternoon. There's no cordon sanitaire around the stadium, which is quite difficult to effect, but we put a man on the moon in 1969, so you could have done that. And actually, the fans also knew that the ground was not full. So when you put all that together, maybe the investigation will show that was purely an underestimate by the SAG and all the people who assess what is required to run the event. And I hope that's the case, and we can say that that's a one-off. But the other things which are more deeply ingrained are the booing of the national anthem and this propensity to allow alcohol to just infect the situation.
Just to cut in, being ruthlessly honest then, let's be honest with ourselves. Given that this country seems to have a special problem with football, not with wider sport or other sports, we've mentioned the success of the Olympics, but we do have a problem with football. Let's be honest, are we fit to host the World Cup?
I think we are. I think that what's happened is certainly in 2004, when we were preparing for the Euros in that case, we actually had a reputation in terms of the way in which we could, and it's sad to say, but the way we could police and manage the security around the stadium with low-profile policing. And we had to basically try and, without being the hectoring, lecturing English, to educate the police forces of maybe some of the southern European countries as to how to do it, where they have paramilitaries as opposed to civil police. And so there is a reputation that England can actually manage the hooligan problem. And it has largely stayed below the surface. It's always there. You can never relax. But the managing of it, I think, just on the other evening was just woefully inadequate. Yeah. So I think we can do it. And I was the director of British Judo at the time of the fantastic Olympics in 2012, and I think this country can actually and should actually aspire to running these events. Yeah.
Sebastian Coe, you said in your first answer that politicians should choose their words carefully in the run-up to this bid. Which politicians and which words?
No, I'm talking generally that there is this assumption that, and I've written and talked about this before, that 2030 the bid was launched with people saying that it's football coming home. We gave the game to the world. We deserved it. We don't deserve anything. That concept in a bid is very old-fashioned. And Mark is right. We need to put some perspective into this as well. While we're talking about the games, and they were successful, and we've held Rugby World Cups, and we have Test match series. We've just had Wimbledon. We have to remember that this is not customary behaviour from British sporting fans, nor is it as widespread in football as people think. Mark is right. He witnessed pockets of this. And there were street parties throughout these championships. Communities came together. I watched a lot of coverage on TV, particularly around community cohesion. There were a lot of things that you would use in a bid for a 2030 attempt to bring to bring these championships
in
in the UK. But there are issues here that football needs to address, and they are uniquely for football.
But Seb, even though the violence that we were talking about was, as you say, confined to pockets, it was not a good look. It wasn't a good look, and it's gone around the world. And I just want to ask you, do you think actually this conversation is somewhat academic, that actually we've already lost it?
No, I don't believe we've already lost it. But the world does need to see that this isn't just, we don't lose the issue in just another news cycle. We need to address these issues, and they need to be seen to be addressed publicly. And if you've got, Mark is right, the UEFA can throw their weight behind two other very credible European bids. If England comes out of this as the preferred bid, then there are over 200 international football associations that will make a decision. And the booing of national anthems and the scenes that we've seen are on news clips around the world and will be used by other bids.
Absolutely.
They will use that. They will use that as a crowbar to support their own bids. So, it was disfiguring and it was damaging.
Richard mentioned Brendan O'Neill, the editor of Spikes, as you can probably tell. He's popped up. Morning. The behaviour of fans, the booing of the anthem, the violence, it's a stain on our bid. Brendan?
It may well be. I don't really know about the politics of this stuff in the same way that Seb Coe does. But I think we shouldn't exaggerate the problems that occurred during the Euro Championships. And we really shouldn't try and sanitise football. Football is not bowls. Football is not tennis. Football is not cricket. Football is a very rowdy, boisterous sport, followed primarily by working class people. It's a way of letting off steam, letting off passion. There's a lot of colour. There's a lot of booing. There's lots of jeering. That is part of the passion and the joy of football. And I'm worried that we will drain the life from football if we try to turn it into just another sport. So we have to be very careful, I think, about how we discuss this issue.
Brendan, rowdy and boisterous is fine. Punching people in the head is not, is it? That's not part
Absolutely
of... That's,
not.
I mean, you wouldn't want to see that in bowls or football. And the trouble is that those scenes and the bottle throwing and people getting cut and people storming through the barriers and people getting in without tickets and taking the seats of people who'd paid, you can't just dismiss that as rowdy, boisterous, working-class behaviour. That's an insult to working-class football fans.
I didn't say that was working class behaviour. I said that football is a working class sport. And that's one of the reasons I think that it gets demonised so much in the media and by the political class, precisely because it's followed by supposedly undesirable people. And of course there was bad behaviour. There was also criminal behaviour. But we're in danger of entering into another moral panic about football fans. There have been many moral panics about football fans over the years, football hooligans, racist fans. There's a constant panic about what football fans are doing. And I think we're having another moral panic now. We need to put this into perspective. This was minority behaviour. The vast majority of the millions of people who cheered England at the weekend behaved incredibly well and are decent people. So let's not extrapolate from the bad behaviour of a few and tar the whole sport with that brush. I think that's incredibly unfair.
Mark Palios, not all fans.
I agree with perspective around this. I don't agree with sort of some of the comments which seek to justify, well, not justify, but actually explain and therefore say it's acceptable. It's not acceptable in the sport. I'm a working class lad. I was brought up from Wavertree, Liverpool, and I don't think that's what the essence of working class behaviour is about. It's about protecting each other. It's about working for each other. It's about culture. I think that the behaviour that we see, we can keep under wraps to some extent. We can suppress it, and it doesn't destroy the passion of the game. Why is it that you can see the passion for the majority of fans are in there? I think it's one of the most attractive things about the game is the fact that there is that passion. But with the benefit comes the burden, is what's being said here. And this is a burden, I think, so unacceptable. The fact that it impacts, and it will impact, as Seb says, and I agree, on the bid that we put forward, and we have to repair the damage on that, and as soon as possible. It still means that on an individual basis, on every game around the country, I was playing in the 70s and the 80s. I was actually assaulted by fans at Watford when I was playing there after the game. Unfortunately, nothing happened. But at the end of the day, it's just unacceptable. It should not be attached to our sport. And it embarrasses me as somebody who's been involved in football all my life.
OK, well, listen, guys, we're out of time because my camera clock tells me it's 8 minutes past 8. But that was a very interesting discussion. Thanks all of you for your time.